Hi, welcome to a video about letters, writing letters for our week 3 assignments here at Lake Michigan College in our technical writing class. As you can see, I have stuff already written up on the board, and I'm in a new location than in my other videos took place. So I was hoping that this would be a better way to see. And I actually have the camera on a swiveling base, which is a chair, actually. So I hope that'll go well. Hey, I'm still in yellow because it's spring, or sort of a yellow gold. So let's get right into the meat of it. First of all, by reviewing the 5 principles, see if you can see those. Yes, you can. The 5 principles of business communication. This goes back to my first video, and I put them kind of high up on the wall here. But first we have the 3 C's here. 3 C's. And the 3 C's are that business communications, and this is technical writing also, technical writing is also business communications. Writing has to be clear. It has to be written in a clear way that's easy to understand, which means stripping it of jargon and extra lingo. It's got to be complete. In other words, your message has to contain all the information that the reader needs to act on whatever it is you're writing about or whatever the purpose of your communication is. And of course, it has to be correct. You don't want to make errors. I probably should share this with you, but I'm going to have to share it in perpetuity for the length of using this video. That I was just reading an article from the Washington Post in which, because of grammatical error, the GOP of Texas has basically claimed that the majority of Texans are gay because of the way they wrote a sentence. And so I'll post that in the classroom so we can all look at it, and then let's hope it stays on the internet basically for however long I'm going to use this video. So, but all business communication and technical writing, of course, also has to build goodwill and save the reader's time. So build goodwill and save the reader's time. And as you see, I have these down here in the purposes of letters. So all of our letters are going to have this purpose. I expressly name it in the purpose of the speaker letter, which I'll talk about in a little while here. But this is something to keep in mind, that these 5 principles are operating in everything that we write in the class, but particularly communications that go out of the company. We want to build goodwill with customers, and with communications even inside the company, we want to build morale and goodwill amongst fellow employees. So we're always building goodwill, and we're always thinking about the reader. We're always saving the reader's time. So I'm not going to talk about these as much today, and I still think I should create an extra video on those subjects, but you know, I'm creating these videos as best I can, so you're getting to see the series. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit, obviously. So today's subject is letters, because in the week 3 assignments here at Lake Michigan College, we have 2 letters that you have to write. One is the salad shooter letter, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the other one is a letter about speakers and denying the claim of a person who wants to get free repairs for his speakers. So the first thing that you have to think about when you're creating a letter is the purpose of the letter, or in some cases, multiple purposes of the letter. And of course, all letters that we do have multiple purposes, because saving the reader's time and building goodwill are purposes for all our letters. So in addition to those purposes, we have other purposes. So basically, we can boil down purposes like this. There's indirect and direct communications. Direct communications are basically communications to inform. Then when we just have to inform people of something, we can just write them very directly. We want to build goodwill, but we don't have to be as worried about our strategies. We're not trying to persuade people when we're writing them directly to inform them of something. We certainly want to be complete and correct and uphold those principles. But we don't have to think as much about style and the way that we write the communication as we do with other communications. But other communications have to be indirect. We have to be a little indirect in our approach. And these communications are definitely the ones in which we persuade, and we have a lot of other things that we have to think about when we're persuading the reader. And one particular form of persuasion is sales. in which we're trying to sell the reader something. It's a particular form of persuasion. Not all persuasive messages are sales messages. For instance, I could have a message in my company in which I'm writing my boss to try to convince my boss of something, or I'm writing to my fellow employees to try to convince them of something. But otherwise, pretty much messages that go outside of a company to potential clients are sales messages for the most part. That we're trying to convince them to buy something. There are exceptions to that, of course, which I'm sure you can think of. So these purposes, we think of communications as either direct or indirect. We think of communications as either to inform or to persuade. And then we also think of good news and bad news communications. Obviously, if I'm writing someone with good news, and this would include neutral news, just to inform them of something. I'm going to write something differently. That's a direct communication. Then when I write bad news is when I'm going to be indirect. So I'm going to be indirect with bad news. Persuasion often comes into bad news. And in a lot of the downfall of technical writing and business writing is people not thinking properly about the fact that what they're writing is bad news. They think they can be direct with the communication, and really they need to be more indirect. And certainly companies, for instance, they change a policy or something, that's really, not just a situation in which you're informing, unless you just want to upset people. If it's a change that's not going to benefit people, if it's a change that is going to alter the way something happens to someone's detriment, you really need to convince them to be on board with that change. You're breaking bad news to them because you're changing, maybe reimbursement for medical expenses, so the company's lowering that amount. So you really need to explain why you're making that change so that people can get on board. People are convinced by good reasons, and that's really important to keep in your mind as you're writing these kinds of messages. People are convinced by good reasons. Okay, so always our purposes are build goodwill. Always our purposes are save the reader's time. And save the reader's time is not only an element of how we organize the material. In other words, often, not always, but often the first thing in the letter is the thing that the reader most wants to know. That's going to be important with our salad shooter. With our speaker one, however, the first thing in the letter is not necessarily the thing the reader most wants to know, because of the nature of the information that we're delivering. So you got to think about that as well. Then there's two other factors that enter in, and these are common business concepts. You can read more about them on the internet. I'll probably bring them up a little in discussion and give you some links, and maybe at some point I'll create more videos about them, because I teach these ideas in business communications as well. The first one I'm going to leave alone and just sort of mention it right now and not deal with it too much. And that's you attitude. And you attitude is a way to express how you're writing, what you're writing, the word choices that you're using, and the way you construct sentences. And the idea is that you're focused on the reader. There's less about you, the writer, in the document. And with a lot of the documents we do in technical writing, you should not be present in the document at all. It's very removed, very objective, third-person distance. But in some cases, like with letters, obviously you're writing the letter and you sign the letter. And in the case of the salad shooter, you're introducing yourself. So you're in the letter, but your emphasis is on the reader. The reader doesn't necessarily want to read you go on and on about you, which I probably violate that all the time with my announcements and things, because I share about me, and it's less emphasis on you, the student. But our communications in education are a little different than our communications would be if this was a business. So I violate that rule, knowing that I'm violating that rule. But also, you got to keep in mind reader benefits. The reader, when it gets a communication, is immediately thinking, how does this affect me? What am I going to get from this? What am I not going to get from this? And of course, usually when we talk about reader benefits, we're talking about positive benefits. What can the reader get? And the reader is very focused on that. And that's going to be important for both of our assignments here in the salad shooter and the speaker letter. So let's go look at these. I'm going to turn this slightly so you can, I hope, see over here a little bit better with the salad shooter. things. So the salad shooter, I actually have a printout this time. Not that this is going to help. You can, of course, download this and read it. I hope I've changed the due date on the one that's on the classroom, because this one has an old due date. But it explains a scenario that talks, and I'm not going to just read it to you, but it talks about all this in-house stuff that's very messy, very much like a soap opera kind of thing, and then gives you your purposes in the letter. And it lists 4 purposes, but of course, build goodwill is always one of our purposes, okay? So we have 4 purposes. We have, you have to introduce yourself. You have to stall the customer because they're waiting for an order of 500 salad shooters, and because of all this in-house stuff, you don't have 500 salad shooters to ship them. Obviously, they're going to figure that out when they get a letter from you rather than a crate full of 500 salad shooters. But you need to explain that. You need to reassure them that the company is doing well, because you want their continued business, and then you want to pitch for their continued business and interest them in new products, which means that you want to try to sell them stuff. Now, just because the purposes are listed in this order does not mean that your letter should be organized like that. In fact, your letter probably should not be organized in that order, because you got to think, first of all, what does the reader want to know first? And oh, I skipped a part over here, so I'm going to slide back over here for a second, because what I skipped was thinking about your audience. You got to think about your audience. You got to think about the mood of your audience, the emotional state that your reader is already in. Is your reader likely to be in a positive mood, a positive reaction to what you're writing, is already feeling positive about you and your company? Is the reader feeling negative about you and your company? Or is the reader not going to receive what you're writing well? Which, of course, with the speaker is the case. The reader is getting turned down. So you got to keep that in mind. And then also, it might be neutral, and neutral is pretty much the same as positive, because we handle it about the same way, right? All right, so these are our purposes, and you got to think about, what does the reader want to know first? And of course, I'll give you some of this, but I'm not going to fill it all out because I want you to figure it out on your own. That's part of doing the assignment. But obviously, the reader wants to know, and if we were in a live classroom, I would ask you and you would respond. And I could be facetious and do this with discussion, but I'll fill in some of the values. Obviously, the reader wants to know, when am I getting these freaking salad shooters? Especially if they already paid you or gave a deposit, or they're planning on selling them, or they were part of their Mother's Day, package, or they're going to give them in gift bags, or who knows what they're going to do with them. But they want them because they ordered them, so they want to know when they're getting their salad shooters. So you can guess for yourself how you think the reader feels about you and about your company already, and figure out the order in which you want to do these things. I would recommend that you don't start the letter with an introduction, because that's focused on you. That's not you attitude. When you're focused on the reader, focus on what the reader wants to know. Focus on what the reader wants to read. So either start with, where are the salad shooters and when am I getting them? Or start with a reader benefit. If I start reading this letter and it says that I'm going to get 25% off, or, hey, how would you like 25% off your next order, and all these things, whatever. You can make it up. This is one where you can get totally as fictional as you want within the parameters described in the letter itself. So it doesn't say you can't invent any discounts or special free things or whatever you want, So think about these things. You got to do all these things. Certainly, when you reassure and you introduce yourself, you got to not mention all that soap opera stuff, So again, you can invent reasons why they're not getting their salad shooters, when they're getting their salad shooters, or maybe they're not getting. Maybe you're going to discontinue the salad shooter, offer them something else instead. You can do all these things. I would prefer that you don't discontinue the salad shooters, but if you come up with something clever in the way you've written it, we'll see. So you definitely should think about design of this document. It's not just paragraphs. You could do a little bit with lists. You could do something with bold facing. You could use pictures. You could use graphics. You could create a logo. I think it mentions in the assignment that you could create a logo letterhead for the company. I think it mentions that with the speaker as well, but this one you get to invent completely. That one you have to use, I think it's Gannon is the name of the speaker company. You also really want to think about the style of the language, the way that you're writing it, the word choice, and the creation of those sentences, because you want to build goodwill, you want attitude, you want a positive emphasis, which is something else I should add here. You want a positive emphasis to everything you're writing, which means you want to avoid any potentially negative language or concepts. And that's why I have this here with a question mark, because do you really want to apologize? Because apology admits fault. And yeah, you're at fault and you're late with the salad shooters, but there's differences of opinion on this, you know. Certainly, if I'm the reader, I might want an apology. On the other hand, you don't want to lead with the apology. And if you do an apology, you have to be very careful about how you craft it. Because you don't want to seem like you're groveling, and you don't want to, you want to do it with, you want to make it positive. You know, so how do you make an apology positive? You know, so that's something to think about as you try to decide how you want to write the salad shooter. And then lastly, and I'm just watching time because I have a meeting here coming up, the speaker assignment. In the speaker assignment, the individual has sent in these speakers for repair, but the speakers have been altered and tampered with, and because of your policy, you can't repair them. But there's like a 15% discount the person gets, or free shipping on new ones, or I can't remember exactly what the benefit is. I didn't bring the book with me, so again, I don't have everything I need, but I remember most of it. So again, we have two purposes. Always we have build goodwill. We're always building goodwill, and just like with the salad shooter, but very importantly with this one, you want the future business of this individual. So you don't want to lock yourself out of getting the future business of this individual. You want that future business. In the other case, you're still doing business together, you know, so that's a different case. But what you're definitely doing is you're writing this individual with bad news to deny the claim to have the speakers repaired for free as under the terms of the warranty. So, you know, you can imagine that the reader is not going to take that news well. You know, and so to keep that reader's future business, you have to craft this very delicately, which is why this is not a direct message. It's an indirect message. It's a bad news message in which you want to use a buffer. You want to use a buffer. And a buffer is something that starts out the message that creates a buffer for the reader from the bad news. Bad news is always communicated in the middle or near the end of a message. It's never, you never lead with bad news. Nobody wants to read bad news, you know. you don't write somebody a letter and start with bad news. And this is one of the things that people struggle with in this class, particularly even more than in business communications, because in business communications, students often have more of a mindset for this kind of thing. Here in technical writing, where we do a lot of business communication, students are thinking, well, you know, I'm just direct, you know, I'm like a scientist, you know, I just need to state the facts. Well, here, if you state the facts and use the language in the assignment write-up, words like tampering and the warranty is void and all this kind of stuff is very negative. You don't want to be negative. You want to be positive emphasis. So start with a reader benefit. That's a good idea for how you start this message with a buffer. You could use a reader benefit as a buffer. You're given a reader benefit in the write-up. You could use that, or you could talk about Gannon and what Gannon is committed to, and use that as a buffer, or something else. So that's something for you to think about. But you definitely want to avoid negative and inflammatory language. And this stuff is built right in. So if you take some of that negative and inflammatory language out of the assignment write-up and put it directly in the letter, then you're not rewriting it in a way that has you attitude, positive emphasis, that builds goodwill, or any of that sort of thing. But you don't have to think about his design as much with this letter because you're not communicating as much information. It's a relatively short letter, but it shouldn't be super short. It's probably going to fill half the page or a little bit more than half the page. But you want to keep the paragraphs on the shorter side. So that's the letter stuff. I hope you enjoyed it. If you got any questions, obviously you can always write me messages in the classroom, either leaving them in discussion or writing them in the water cooler or sending me a private message. Though messages and questions that all students could benefit from should be placed somewhere where all students could see them. And here, we're now my longest video so far this semester, so hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.